When playing a deathmatch game in Age of Empires, there are several things that you have to look at. And one of these things is the map, because there are different strategies for different map types. In this video, I'm going to show you what those strategies are. Now, for the beginning of a deathmatch game, meaning the early game, the strategies don't really change that much. They're pretty much set in stone for whatever map you're doing. However, for the mid-game, your strategy is drastically going to change, and you're going to need to be flexible in order to succeed at different maps. And that is what this video is about. Now, before I talk about the strategies for each map, there are some points that I need to address. First is about some terminology. Now, for me, I define the mid-game as being after that initial rush, or as being once your economy has been set up. Also, when I'm talking about team games, when I refer to the flank players, I mean the players that are closest towards their enemies. And when I refer to the pocket players, I mean the players on a team that are sandwiched by their team members. Now, some general advice that would go for all the map types is that no matter what map type you're playing, you need to have a strong economy up and rolling. You need this, that way you can replace those soldiers not after they fall, but almost before they fall. So that means that your army will always be as strong as possible. Also, to keep your army strong, you need to have a good army composition, meaning you need to have units that are going to defeat every type of unit that the enemy is going to be throwing at you. Now, this is situational depending on the map and upon your enemy's civilization, but you always need to keep this in mind. Next, you always need to be conquering ground, not just destroying your enemy's armies. What this means is that if you destroy an enemy's army, you need to then place buildings where that enemy has been destroyed, where you have displaced that enemy from. Now, this is similar to doing an infrastructure strategy, but I need to make a distinction between an infrastructure strategy and a sort of aggressive army strategy. Now, to be honest, infrastructure strategy is kind of a term that I made up, so there might be an official term out there that I don't know. But what an infrastructure strategy is a strategy in which you have a strong army that slowly moves forward, taking ground as it goes. This also means that you never move your army away from your defenses, and the reason for this is that way you won't lose any of those powerful units. Siege civilizations, or civilizations that have strong but fragile units and that have good defenses, are oftentimes infrastructure civilizations. On the other hand, though, you have an aggressive army strategy, as I like to call it. And what this means is that you have a strong, fast army that takes out your opponents fast and then continues to take out your opponents to press your advantage. Now, both of these are good strategies, and both of these have their weaknesses. For example, an infrastructure strategy can give your opponent time to kind of rebuild if you have been kind of slow with it. And a fast, aggressive army strategy can leave you undefended, and if that army is wiped out, then, well, you're very vulnerable. However, keep these ideas in mind as I talk about the maps that we're going to be playing on. Now, the first map I'm going to talk about is Arabia, and in this map you have clumps of trees and some hills spread out throughout the map. Now, this map is probably the map that's played the most by pro deathmatch games, so if you like to watch games, you'll probably see a lot of this. And there are some important things that you need to know about this map. The first one is that for a mid-game, you need to gain map control as soon as you can, and you need to hold map control. What this means is you need to take those extra gold piles, and you need to take those hills. The reason you need to take these is because gold piles allow you to field your expensive armies, and hills allow you to gain a tactical advantage because they're hard to attack. Also, a tip that I have that I don't see very many people doing for some reason, and I really don't know why they don't do this, is you need to make walls. If you have trade going, wall that trade up. If you have an economy, place walls there so that way your opponent isn't going to raid this. I don't see pro players wall very much, and this bugs me so much. I don't know why they don't do this in deathmatch games, but oh well, it's their choice, I guess. Fast civilizations are normally good in deathmatch on Arabia because you need to be able to move from one point of the map to the other quickly in order to keep your army alive or in order to attack where your enemy is most vulnerable. Also, don't forget to try to flank your enemy, so attack from multiple positions at once. In a 1 vs 1 match, you can do this by attacking at multiple positions where your opponent has an economy or their military production buildings. Or in a team game, you can do this by attacking with your ally at multiple parts of your opponent's team at the same time. Also, a really important aspect of an Arabia match is that you need to raid your opponent's economy as much as you can, because this will slow your opponent's military production, which will allow you to have a military and therefore a game-winning advantage. So remember, gain map control, fast civilizations are good, it's a really good idea to flank, and you need to raid your opponent. The next map I want to talk about is called Oasis. And this map is probably the most commonly played on the HD version of Age of Empires 2, for deathmatch anyways. Now, what Oasis is a pool of water in the center of the map that is encircled by a relatively thick layer of trees. These trees are then encircled by a clear, grassy area, and this is where the players spawn. And what this results in is an area where there are basically two fronts of battle. There'll be a front on the right side or on the left side of the map. Now what this means is that in a team game, you need to have the flank players pushing on that side with all their might. They need to concentrate on that side as much as possible. And the pocket players need to help them. In a 1 vs 1 game, this means that you need to be making sure that you're not leaving your other side open. This map is good for a balance of civilizations, because you do have an open area in those two lanes, but you also have it to be kind of closed off, so that way you can't flank nearly quite as well because of those trees that are in the middle. And this creates some very interesting games. Now, an infrastructure strategy on this map will be effective, but it'll also be expensive, because the area in which combat takes place is pretty wide, so you do have a lot of area to cover. I think that this creates a balance, which is why this map is so commonly played. Now, probably the second most commonly played map, though, is Michi. And I gotta tell you, this is by far the most unbalanced map in Age of Empires 2 Deathmatch. So what Michi is there are two teams are separated by this very thick layer of trees. And in order to get to the opponents, you need to cut into those trees with onagers or siege onagers. What this results in is a long slugfest between you and your opponents, in which infrastructure civilizations will excel. However, there are some techniques to know. First, when you're cutting towards your opponent, make your end of that cut much wider than your opponent's end. What this results in is a funnel, in which makes it easy for allied units to go into that cut, but makes it difficult for enemy units to enter as well. This essentially creates a choke point, which is where lots of enemies will be destroyed. Also, you need to have a very balanced economy, and you need to be sending exactly the right composition of units in order to defeat your opponents. In a Michi game, the right composition of units will often involve lots of siege, but units to defend that siege as well. So, for example, you'll make trebuchets and bombard cannons to take out your opponent's bombard towers and other fortifications, and you'll make onagers to take out your opponent's units, and then you'll have some halberdiers or something like that to defend against your opponent's army. Also, you're going to need to making some horsemen to try to raid and take out those siege weapons. I would also like to point out that in this map, you don't use the standard start that you would for most deathmatch games, because you don't have direct contact with your enemy at first. So you should try to boom and get as many villagers as possible, so that way you can create as many military buildings as possible, so that way you can have the strongest army once that initial cut has either reached you or you have reached your opponent. One other tip is build lots of towers or outposts and other military buildings along the entire tree line so that if your opponent creates new cuts, you won't be caught quite as much off guard. And the last map that is commonly played in Deathmatch is probably the least common, but yet it's still somewhat common, and that is Black Forest. Now you need to have a normal start because you still want to try to rush your opponents, but it often plays out somewhat like a Michi game in that there are these tight spaces in which you need to fight. However, it's not quite as much as a slugfest as Michi is, and you need to use a lot more strategy, I would argue, than you do in a Michi map. For example, you need to gain map control, so that way you can gain those all-important resources. But you also need to be able to save those resources effectively, so that way when you run out, you won't be at a significant disadvantage. Also, don't forget that using siege onagers, or in the HD expansions, just simply onagers, to cut new pathways is always an option, and you always need to have a plan to deal with this. Or, if you actually want to, you should use it yourself to catch your opponent off guard. So, these are my tips and tricks for playing the 4 most common maps in a deathmatch game. If there's something that I didn't cover that you think I should, please tell me in a comment and I'll try to respond to you. And thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy.